Sir Sandford Fleming is probably one of the most important Canadians who ever lived. This is a man who just seemed to show up throughout our history in the 19th century. He was apparently there when the citizens of Montreal burned down their Parliament building, and he helped save a portrait of Queen Victoria that survives to this day. He created our first postage stamp. He surveyed many of the railways that would crisscross eastern Canada, as well as the start of the CPR, and he did many other things. He was also the man who helped connect the British Empire through the telegraph, and of course, he popularized and made sure that the world was on international time with time zones and the 24-hour clock. So we're going to look at the life of Sir Sandford Fleming. Sir Sandford Fleming was born in 1827 in Scotland. He lived most of his early life in Scotland, but when he turned 18 with his brother, he came to Canada, where he wanted to create a new life for himself. He'd apprenticed as a surveyor, and he thought that Canada was the perfect place because it was so large with a lot of untouched wilderness that he could survey. Now in 1849, he created the Royal Canadian Institute with several friends. Now originally he actually planned this to be something that would be used by surveyors, but it eventually evolved into a scientific community. The same year he created the Royal Canadian Institute, Montreal residents were very angry about the Rebellion Losses Bill, and they showed their anger by burning down the Parliament buildings in Montreal. This was during the era of the province of Canada, and that would eventually lead to the province's capital being shifted all over the place until it eventually settled with Ottawa, which became our nation's capital at Confederation in 1867. Now during this fire, apparently, the story goes, Sir Sandford Fleming, along with 3 others, ran into the fire and rescued a giant portrait of Queen Victoria and saved it from the flames, and that portrait still exists to this day. 2 years later, in 1851, he created the 3-penny beaver. This was Canada's first ever postage stamp, and some say it's the first postage stamp that actually features an animal rather than a head of state. And you can actually see one of these stamps if you visit the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. Sir Sandford Fleming's real love was the railroad, and he began to survey railroads in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario, or at least what would become Quebec and Ontario, but at the time was known as the province of Canada. And he was a very good surveyor. He was somebody who advocated for iron bridges when the standard was wood bridges. He felt it was safer and it would last longer even with the extra cost. And he was a man who was very forceful and knew what he wanted, and he wasn't going to back down. And that made him an excellent chief engineer, but it also rankled a lot of the higher-ups and other people he worked with who didn't like that forceful nature and the fact that he seemed to have unlimited energy. In 1871, after British Columbia joined Canada on the promise of building a transcontinental railway across the country, Sir Sandford Fleming was chosen to be the chief engineer. He spent several years surveying through Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or what would be Saskatchewan, and what would be Alberta, all the way to the Rocky Mountains. He believed the Yellowhead Pass was the way the railway needed to take, and he advocated for that pass. Unfortunately, due to people feeling that he was spending too much money and taking too long, he was eventually dismissed in June 1880 and given a $30,000 payout, which was pretty much a fortune back then. He took that payout and he started investing in the new Canadian Pacific Railway, and that made him a major shareholder. And that's why, when the last Spike photo was taken, the man who stood there with a top hat and his best clothes was Sir Sandford Fleming. He dressed up for this when a lot of people didn't because he knew of the importance of this moment and how that picture would last through time. But what he's most famous for, and that's what the Heritage Minute that was released in the 1990s shows of him, is standardized time. After missing a train in Ireland because the schedule was printed in AM rather than PM, he realized that there needed to be some sort of standardized time across the world because the world was shrinking and people were traveling faster than ever before. He advocated for 24 time zones circling the globe, each an hour wide or 15 degrees of longitude. From 1876 to 1886, he was proposing this idea to pretty much every scientific conference he could find, and eventually it started to take off. And by 1929, nearly every country on the earth was using standardized time and the 24 time zones. But not only that, he was also the Chancellor of Queen's University for 35 years, and he advocated for a submarine telegraph line which would connect the British Empire from Canada to New Zealand to Australia to India, all the way back to Great Britain and then across the Atlantic Ocean, and this was finally completed in 1902 and got the name of the All-Red Line. And if that wasn't enough, he even co-founded the Alpine Club of Canada, which only existed briefly but inspired the later Alpine Club of Canada. And in 1897, he was knighted by Queen Victoria for his service to not only Canada, but the British Empire. In his later years, Sir Sandford Fleming rested on his laurels. He had done a lot to create our modern world and to help create the Canada that we know and love today. And on July 22nd, 1915, he passed away. He's been declared a person of national historic significance. A Google Doodle was released to honor him on his 190th birthday. Various places and roads are named for him. Fleming, Saskatchewan is named for him. Mount Sandford Fleming is also named for him. And he's also considered one of the greatest Canadians to ever live, and somebody who really helped leave their mark on the history of our country.